Welcome to Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, the radio chick, Annie Ubellis. Join Annie on Tuesdays and Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time with an open chat room full of her regulars. And yes, you can even call in. Call 917-889-3675. That's 917-889-3675 to be a part of the action on the phone line. Not able to listen live? Not a problem. You can always catch Annie, the radio chick, and Southern Sense Talk Radio podcasts in archives at southern-sense.com. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Southern Sense the right way.
Well, I'm hoping that anyone can hear me out there. I've been having a hard time just trying to get myself signed into Southern Sense. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick Annie. And if you're out there and you're in the chat room and you can hear me, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm flying with the seat of my pants and hoping someone can hear the radio show. For some reason, I cannot get signed in, but I'm hoping that you can hear me. Anyway, we do have our guest, I do believe, and Don Brown, are you with us?
I'm here, Annie, and I can hear you just fine. Of course, I've got you on the line, so you sound good to me.
Well, I normally Skype in, and because I can't Skype in, I cannot get myself up on SHR Media, which also goes out on Spreaker and iHeartRadio. It's showing that I am signed in, but I have absolutely no sound coming through my soundboard. I've got zip zero. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. Absolutely no sound. Unbelievable. I don't know what's going on, but hopefully others can hear us.
Well, I can try to log and see if I've got you on. I can do that.
Well, I'm showing on my Skype that I'm getting sound through the speakers. Here we go. Now we've got double. Just bear with me while I switch this around.
Oh, my goodness. Yannick, stop. My headset's all hooked. Now my headset is all hooked up with everything else. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. I've got wires tangled in every which direction going sideways. Oh, man. Can you hear me? I'm getting no sound.
You sound good to me.
This is crazy. This is absolutely insane. What the heck is going on with me here? I'm showing sound going through, but I've got things coming through my microphone. Unbelievable. Switch back to another headset. Now I've got double. Can you hear me?
I hear you, Annie. I've got a little bit of reverberation, but I'm hearing you.
All right. Well, it's showing that I've got it coming through my speakers. For some reason, my microphone is not working, so I'm using the old handset. I have no idea what's going on over here, but hopefully we'll get this all up and running properly. This is crazy. Thank you, BTR, for doing this. No wonder why I'm migrating away from Blog Talk Radio and going to other platforms. Just bear with us, Don. I've never had it this crazy. Curtis, are you with us?
I am here.
All right. It looks like we're live here, and hopefully we're up on SHR. I hear it coming through. This is crazy now. I'm showing it coming through on my soundboard. Oh, this is absolutely strange. Oh, man. All right, we're just going to go on with it, and hopefully people can listen in. It's showing up on the SHR board, and let's bring the chat room back up. All right. Well, welcome to Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio. Not for long. High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, the Fix FM out of Charleston, South Carolina. Also up on Spreaker, and I do believe as of today we're supposed to be up on iHeartRadio also. So welcome. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick Annie, along with my debonair, my intellectual and also handsome co-host Curtis C.S. Bennett. Curtis, are you ready for the insane asylum today?
Yes, I believe I'm ready.
And our guest is early and also with us rather early. And people that listen to the show know that we start off each and every show with a dedication to a fallen hero. But today's dedication is not to a fallen hero. It is to 30 fallen heroes. And this, Don, I had gotten from a website called Extortion, this thing of ours. And it's titled Remember Our Brothers, and it was posted by David Carter's Facebook page by his friend and Brian Nichols' friend, Randy Conrad. And we thank Randy for this because this is emotional, and I will be doing it, I really don't have background music for this one, and I'm looking for it, and of course everything is all changed around on me. I can't believe this. If anything can possibly go wrong today, it is going wrong. I'm sure this is not Friday the 13th, is it? Please, someone tell me it's not Friday the 13th, or is it a full moon? Something's going wrong around here today.
It's the 8th.
Ah, jeez. But this is by Randy Conrad, and he wrote, the crew of CH-47D, call sign Extortion 17, were men that I was honored to have worked with here in Afghanistan. Just a few hours ago at 06:30 this morning, we were able to have a small memorial here at the FOB honoring them. The ceremony was held at the Task Force Nighthawk Headquarters flagpole. The flag stood at half-mast as 3 staggered formations of soldiers were individually called to attention and then to parade rest. Around the sides of the small gathering stood a few hundred soldiers, all in their own micro formations. These small formations happened without any orders to do so. You see, every heart here was centered on giving every ounce of respect to these men, whom they quite certainly call brothers. Every bit of order and decency seemed to automatically happen without anyone choreographing it. Truly a beautiful sight to behold. The 3 main formations consisted of the 3 companies of Task Force Knighthood. In the middle and closest to the flag was Bravo Company. And from B Company, there were these heroes that came from B to make up the 2 National Guard units, one from Kansas and the other from Colorado. Both units lost their brothers on that fateful August 6th. Directly in front of me was standing at parade rest a staff sergeant that was holding in his hand behind his back a rosary. Through the entire ceremony, I noted him taking long, drawn breaths and continuously and methodically moving his fingers over each bead in that rosary. I was able to capture that on film as it was truly moving for me to see. Among the micro-formations surrounding the ceremony were formations of Czech soldiers, Jordanian soldiers, Afghan soldiers. They too were all standing in properly arranged formations out of genuine respect. The ceremony began with the chaplain giving a prayer and asking God to help heal the brokenhearted. It was a beautiful opening, and already many in attendance were beginning to shed tears. Following this prayer, the 3 men formations were called to attention. They then were called to render a salute with present arms. This salute was mirrored by every member in formation in attendance, to include the Czech, Jordanians, and Afghans. It was held in place while our national anthem was played. This is where my tears began. Honoring every facet of the Army values, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. He gave examples how each one of these men lived up to those values individually. They truly set the example in their daily lives and were indeed some of the most Americans' finest. Following the task force commander was B Company's commander. Through a broken voice and tears streaming down his face, he spoke of each of these men individually, not just as soldiers, but as fathers, sons, siblings, husbands, and to him personally, friends. One such story he told was of the tattoo that C.W. Carter, the co-pilot, had on his arm. It was a poem that said the following: "When I get to heaven, to St. Peter I will tell, just another soldier reporting, sir. I've spent my time in hell." My heart crumbled when I heard those words, as I could honestly see him doing just that. After B Company's commander finished, he was followed by 5 soldiers, one at a time. Each one of them were closest friends of each of the individual heroes. They shared stories of great times together, of how these men inspired them and brought each of their unique personalities to brighten even the darkest of days. These stories were personal, so I'm not going to share them here. They were meant for the friends and brothers in arms that served with these guys. After these men shared their personal stories of their friends, no, brothers, the chaplain returned to give a brief sermon out of Psalm 62, encouraging the soldiers there to seek strength from God, from each other, and from their families. The fight here is long from over. Next was and always is the most powerful and moving part of any military memorial for me personally. The roll call, then the 21-gun salute, and the playing of taps. For those of you that have never attended a military memorial, the roll call is a tradition that goes way back to our beginning as an Army. You see, every day when you have the first formation of the day, it is for accountability. That's how NCOs and commanders ensure that they have all of their guys accounted for. The roll call at a memorial service is conducted by an officer or NCO calling out the names of their men. When the names are called, soldiers respond with "Here, Sergeant." When the NCO gets to a name of one of the soldiers lost, they wait for a response. Silence never sounds so loud or feels so heavy in that moment. They speak the soldier's rank, first name, and last name, and wait. Again, silence. They then call out the soldier's rank, first name, middle initial, and last name one last time. And as everyone longs to hear, "Here, Sergeant," it never comes. In that last moment of silence, you faintly hear in the rear an NCO say, "Ready, fire, bang." Ready, fire, bang. Ready, fire, bang. Then the bugle begins playing taps. I will freely admit, by the time the roll call has begun, my eyes are misty. When that first volley of the 21-gun salute sounds off, I jump hard. And every time I know it's coming, but it still hits me like a ton of bricks. That is when the tears freely fall from my eyes. Tap has to be the most painfully moving sound for me to hear. It seems to never end as the litany of faces of friends and comrades I have lost appear in my mind's eye, one by one by one. Never forgotten, my brothers. Never forgotten. Immediately after taps, a beautiful thing happens that is uniquely aviation. 4 helicopters flying in diamond formation conduct a flyover. This was done with an Apache flanked by 2 Blackhawks and followed by a Chinook. When the formation got directly overhead, the Chinook broke hard right and high. This symbolizes the ascent into heavens as it leaves the rest of the formation. Stunning, moving, powerful, beautiful. The next was the leaders of each of the militaries present stepping up to the display and rendering their honors with a salute, a gift, and a moment of silence before turning and paying respect to the close friends that spoke earlier in the ceremony. This concludes the official ceremony. Still, the soldiers of Task Force Nighthawk are not finished. They form a line and one by one go up to the display and render their own personal respects. We few, we happy few, we bands of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood for me shall be my brother. My friends of the campfire, allow me to present my brothers in arms who gave their lives in duty so that we may cherish to the very freedoms we enjoy today. I will add to Randy's list also the names of the brave men and women that also lost their lives in Extortion 17. They were Lieutenant Commander Jonas B. Kelsel, Special Warfare Operation Master Chief Petty Officer Louis J. Langlis, Senior Chief Petty Officer Thomas A. Ratzliff, Senior Chief Petty Officer Craig M. Vickers, Chief Petty Officer Brian R. Bill, Chief Petty Officer John W. Faze, Chief Petty Officer Kevin A. Houston, Chief Petty Officer Matthew D. Mason, Chief Petty Officer Stephen M. Mills, Chief Petty Officer Nicholas H. Null, Chief Petty Officer Robert J. Reeves, Chief Petty Officer Heath M. Robinson, Chief Petty Officer First Class Derek C. Benson, Petty Officer First Class Christopher G. Campbell, Petty Officer First Class Jared W. Day, Petty Officer First Class John Duwagdara, Petty Officer First Class Michael J. Strange, Petty Officer First Class John T. Tomlinson, Petty Officer First Class Aaron C. Vaughn, Petty Officer First Class Jason R. Workman, Petty Officer First Class Jason D. Pittman, Petty Officer Second Class Nicholas D. Spear, Chief Warrant Officer David R. Carter, Chief Warrant Officer Brian J. Nichols, Sergeant Patrick D. Hamburger, Sergeant Alexander J. Bennett, Specialist Spencer C. Duncan, Tech Sergeant John W. Brown, Staff Sergeant Andrew W. Harville, Tech Sergeant Daniel L. Zerbe. Today's show is dedicated to these 30 men that lost their lives on August 6, 2011, in the taking down of Extortion 17. And to this, instead of playing our dedication song by Todd Allen Harrington, we will play taps and come back with our show. And go. This show is dedicated to all the brave men and women who have served, who are serving, and will serve in our military, as well as to the brave men and women who serve every day to protect and serve as our first responders. God bless them all. We never say thank you enough. And to finish off, we now play My Name is America by Todd Allen Harrington. And we also say our deepest sorrows and sympathies go out to the Dallas Police Department and the 5 fallen heroes. God bless them all.
Born in the grip of oppression, I fought for my liberty. I paid with the blood of my people. Freedom has never been free. Now my door's always open to dreamers and friends. When I'm attacked, I protect and defend, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. My strength was not taken from others. Others gave it to me. They believe in the virtues I stand for. my respect for humanity. Now I'm challenged by tyrants who envy my power, but their vicious deeds become my finest hour, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. For those who need me, I'll always be here. For those who will harm me, I'll face without fear. But I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. I'm America, yes, America is my name. Is my
All right, and we're back. This is Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic High, the Fix FM out of Charleston, South Carolina. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick Annie, along with my co-host Curtis C.S. Bennett. Curtis, we're ready to rock and roll. I think I finally got most of the kinks worked out, but still it's not working the way it should be. But we're going to muddle through it. Shall we welcome our guest, Don Brown, author of Call Sign, Extortion 17, The Shootdown of SEAL Team 6. Don, welcome to the Insane Asylum today.
Well, thank you, Annie, and it's good to be with you also, Curtis. Thank you for taking the afternoon to dedicate and to honor these great 30 Americans who lost their lives on August 6th, 2011. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
Oh, no, it is our pleasure and our honor. You wrote a fantastic book, and if anyone who picks up this book doesn't walk away angry, then they have no emotion. I mean, I started getting angry in the first chapter, much less by the time I finished the book. I mean, what we learned about Extortion 17 through the press and what you write about are two completely different stories.
Unfortunately, the press has been negligent and blind in covering this story, and it was largely suppressed. And it was, as I point out often, it was sandwiched between two higher profile events, one being the killing of Osama bin Laden on May the 1st, 2011, and then on September 11, 2012, there was the ransacking of the American consulate in Benghazi. And unfortunately, the stories of these great heroes has been put off to the side, but the magnitude of the loss is very poignant. It was the largest loss of American life in the Afghan war and the single largest loss of life in U.S. Navy SEAL history. We tragically lost 5 heroic Dallas police officers who were gunned down last night in early hours of the morning by barbarians. There were 30 Americans, by contrast, who were lost on this mission, and they were the best that we had to offer, and bless you for honoring their names today.
Oh, what I was reading, even when you go on the Internet, I was just so flabbergasted by the misinformation that was put out there, and I'm so glad that you wrote this book to really clear the air. And you're currently in negotiations to have this made into a movie, right?
Yes, negotiations are underway, and so we will continue to keep you apprised as those negotiations continue, and we're very, very hopeful.
Well, especially on the tail of going with the the movie out about Benghazi, 13 Hours, having yours come out right after that, I hope we wake up the public, really.
This story needs to be told. It's a failure on multiple accounts. As I've said, and I've spoken on the topic on a number of occasions since my book was released last year, either it is criminal neglect, or a deliberate setup of these 35 Americans. At any rate, there's no defending or excusing what happened to these men. Before we were able to dig into the actual investigation, and I had access to the military investigation, which was the basis on which I wrote my book. Before we had that, we were just hearing the official military version, politically driven version, that this was something that happened in the fog of war and could not have been prevented. But nothing could have been further from the truth. This could have been prevented on multiple fronts. But it is a breakdown on multiple fronts, as I say, starting with the rules of engagement and then just one flabbergasting event after another. We could have protected these men, I'm convinced of it, but we did not, and now they are gone because of our government's neglect. Well,
reading your book, I find it very, very hard to think that this was a minor oops. I really can't see it being a minor oops. To me, the more I read the book and the more I went over my notes last night, I can only say that this had to have been deliberate, but that's my personal opinion. They were using aircraft that was not specifically tasked for what they were doing. And we're going to get into all these details, but when I look at one thing after another, I don't believe in coincidences. There may be maybe it just happens to be on the same date as another incident, such as the bombing of Hiroshima. Oh, that might be a coincidence. But when I look at all the things that went into this event, I can't see it as being an accident or little oops.
It's impossible when you could look at any one thing and try to explain it away, but it's impossible when you look at the compilation of the evidence together to conclude that this is all simply coincidental. As I say, either it was a deliberate sacrifice or criminal negligence. And if you give the chain of command the benefit of the doubt, the negligence involved from allowing Afghans to board this chopper at the last second, to refusing to engage in pre-suppression fire of the landing zone and letting this chopper fly directly into a Taliban nest, to removing bullets from the bodies of some of the Navy SEALs when they came back to Andrews and then throwing those bullets away and keeping all that out of the final report is absolutely inexcusable. But all that happened.
Well, we're talking about the shootdown of Extortion 17, the Chinook helicopter that went down in Afghanistan, taking 30 American military with it, along with 7 Afghan and 1 military dog also. So it's actually 31 American lives that were lost on August 6th of 2011, just a mere 9 months after Osama bin Laden was killed. And when I look at the circumstances, it's just 90 days after Osama bin Laden. It's just very too close to it. And what appears to be a massive cover-up. I never heard of a military, and you're a former JAG officer, and you can answer this, but I've never heard of a military investigation concluding within 31 days. That, to me, is staggering.
Well, it's impossible to thoroughly investigate a major aviation disaster as this was within 31 days if you're really trying to get to the bottom of the disaster. Of course, in one sense, we know what the bottom line is, that we flew a SEAL team deliberately into a Taliban nest and did not give them pre-suppression fire. But that is not what the official report claims. The official report claims it was a fog of war. But understand, we got access to the military records which had been classified and then was declassified after the official report came out. So we know all the mishaps that took place. We know about every aspect of the cover-up. there's a lot that we still don't know, but we know enough to know that this case deserves serious attention from the public and serious scrutiny from the Congress, and it hasn't gotten it yet, not to the extent that it needs.
No, and the purpose of you writing the book was to get Congress to reopen the investigation, correct?
That is a big part of it. Yes, we there has not been a serious investigation by the Congress at all. The House Governmental Affairs Subcommittee, chaired by Jathan Chaffetz of Utah, had a hour and a half, basically what they call it a tribute to the heroes of Extortion 17. But there have been no grilling questions of anyone in a public forum, none whatsoever, and it needs to happen. And part of the problem is if you read my book, and I hope that some of your listeners will, there are about 17 points that we include concerning major red flags that occurred during the course of this investigation. But if you wipe all those away except for one thing only, the rules of engagement, this still would be an inexcusable mission the way it was flown. Because what happened is the first and biggest red flag is that these 30 Americans, primarily Navy SEALs, although not all Navy SEALs, we have brave National Guard members and Air Force Special Operations officers on board as well, were crammed onto this Chinook helicopter and basically flown what should have been a short flight of 10 minutes from wheels up to wheels down into an area that we saw had Taliban in the landing zone. We know that because there was an AC-130 gunship circling counterclockwise over the landing zone, saw Taliban running to the landing zone, and requested permission to fire to take the Taliban out. Well, get this, permission was denied. This was the ultimate stand-down order. We've heard about stand-down orders in Benghazi, but a year before Benghazi, we have a stand-down order that cost us 30 Americans, including 17 U.S. Navy SEALs. And there have been no investigations into why the rules of engagement were set the way they were. And if we don't bring this to the public light, the danger is it could happen to other Americans. Whoever is responsible for setting these rules of engagement, which basically were suicidal to this mission, needs to be held accountable. And the heat needs to be placed on the powers that be so that in the future, if some sort of foolish, idiotic decision is made just to fly a SEAL team or a Ranger team or a Green Beret team or, recon team or whatever into a Taliban nest, that landing zone is cleared out. The rules of engagement allow our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines to fight without one hand tied behind their back. So that's why this needs to be brought to the light of day to save lives in the future.
Hey, Don.
Hey, yes, Curtis.
Wasn't there also 2 fully armed Apache helicopters accompanying the C-130?
Yes, there were actually 5 aircraft that left that started heading toward this landing zone. 2 Chinooks. That one of the Chinooks, one of the CH-170s was empty, and then in addition to those 2 Chinook helicopters, there were 2 fully armed Apache helicopters flying alongside of Extortion 17 as it finally approached the landing zone, and then the AC-130 above. So there was tremendous firepower in the air that could have cleared that landing zone, but the United States Chain of Command did not allow those aircraft to come in and clear the landing zone out, knowing that Taliban was moving toward the landing zone, just refused to allow them to do it, and our men were killed because of that. And any one of those choppers, either one of the 2 Apaches could have done it. The AC-130 could have done it. They could have wiped that landing zone as clean as a breakfast plate before you put scrambled eggs on it if they wanted to, but they did not, and our men were killed. And the rules of engagement, in and of themselves, the way they were set, these Taliban-friendly rules of engagement are absolutely criminal. You don't. And just think for a moment, Curtis, about the American rules of engagement. It's always been a basic premise of U.S. military doctrine that before we send troops into a landing zone, we do the best we can to clear it. If you think back even to June 6, 1944 at Normandy, the Navy started to pummel and pound the French coastline hours before we ever sent men in. We could not totally clear it, but we're trying to clear it. At Iwo Jima, the same thing. Before the Marines hit the beaches in February of 1945, we were already hitting the landing zone. And over and over, this has been our basic doctrine. But in this case, our basic tenet of clear the landing zone was just pulled back and these guys were allowed to fly into a Taliban nest, and it's inexcusable.
All right, well, we got a caller in on the line. Let me bring this individual in. I kind of recognize the number, but it's not a number I've seen lately. Area code 816, you're on the air live with Southern Sense. I'm your hostess, Annie, the radio chick, with Curtis, my co-host, and our guest, Don Brown. To whom am I speaking?
Annie, you know who this is.
I said I recognize the number, and Thomas, I haven't heard from you in a while. That's why I said you've been missed. You have a question or a comment for our author guest?
Yeah, first of all, sir, I want to thank you for your service to our United States military and your dedication to, writing this story. And then second of all, just sitting here listening to you and what you guys are sharing, it's bringing my blood to a boil. Because first of all, I did not know that we had attack helicopters overhead that could have taken out, cleared that out. They made it seem like that we were going through a hot zone. First of all, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we usually move special ops forces, we don't put that many in one place. We usually separate them, don't we?
Thomas, first of all, thank you for your comments. And to answer your second question first, yes, it will be typical to separate, to split the special operators up in two different helicopters. As a matter of fact, when this mission started, it started at 2:22 a.m. Afghan time for about a 10-minute flight. These two choppers took off Extortion 16 and 17. Extortion 17, as you were alluding to, was jam-packed with Navy SEALs, 30 Americans on board. Extortion 16, which took off with it and began to fly toward the landing zone with it, was totally empty of it in the flight crew. And no explanation has been given as to why the SEAL team was not split from one chopper to the other. The other thing to remember is that these two choppers, Extortion 16 and 17, 17 being the one that was fatally shot down, had flown another mission approximately 3 hours earlier that evening with an Army Ranger team. That mission with the Ranger team, the team was split up between both helicopters. Extortion 16 had half the Ranger team. Extortion 17 had the other half the Ranger team. But for whatever reason, for some reason that we don't know even now, for whatever reason, the helicopter was jam-packed, 17 was jam-packed, and 16 was empty, and we still don't know the answer for that, and there needs to be accountability for it.
I'm gonna make a statement, and then I'm gonna listen on mute. But me personally, I believe someone in the highest reaches of our U.S. government gave the location of that helicopter, and they did it. They did it to prove a point that they're above the law. Because as we all know, that within our government we have elements of the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's my conspiracy theory on that point. And Annie, thanks for taking my call, and I'm listening to the rest of the show on mute. So.
Hey, Don.
Thank you, Thomas.
Well, Annie Curtis is bringing some very good points. He's grasping the issues very well. When I wrote this book, basically my goal was to lay out evidence and not to really, engage in conspiracy theories, because if I did that, first of all, the conspiracy theories would be all that anybody talked about. But the problem here is the evidence is so damning, you don't need conspiracy theories. Now, with regard to Curtis's point that someone in the government knew about it, let me tell you what we do know. We know, first off, that the British press and the French press both reported from a source inside the inside the Afghan government. The British and French press both reported that the Taliban had been tipped on the exact landing zone of this helicopter. Now, the British and French press reported that. However, the official and military investigation did not even address that issue as to whether the Taliban had been tipped, even though the UK Daily Mail and several other prominent European publications reported they had been tipped. Our military investigation ignored that point. Very little attention was paid to it, by the Chaffetz Committee in the Dog and Pony Show, which lasted about an hour and a half that I mentioned earlier, honoring the heroes of Extortion 17. The issue that Curtis has brought up needs to be peeled back and layered and examined by the Congress. Was the Taliban tipped? If so, who tipped them? And why would we fly a helicopter full of Navy SEALs right into the Taliban landing zone that was full of Taliban? When you stop and think about it, for the Taliban to happen to be right in the landing zone in the middle of the night on a dark, moonless night, just waiting is more than coincidental in and of itself. But that's what happened. I do believe they were tipped. I don't know who tipped them, but we do know that there were there were Afghan officers in flight control there with American officers. And we know we've had a huge problem with what we call green on blue violence, meaning Afghan military who are working with U.S. military being actually radicalized. And we've had problems with Afghan officers shooting officers in the back. We had a 2-star general shot a couple of years ago by an Afghan officer who was supposed to be part of a security detail. So it's a big problem. And we need to get to the bottom of it. I'm glad Curtis brought that issue up.
Yes, thank you, Thomas, for the call. Really appreciate it. If you want to get back in and make a comment, Thomas, let me know ahead of time, and we'll bring you back on. But this is an important point where, the Daily Mail out of the UK was carrying the story about the Afghan official stating that they knew that it was a Taliban setup. You've got the Taliban that they were hunting, Qarir Tahir, stating that, yes, I set up the ambush. Why wasn't it brought up with Chaffetz's committee? And why did he just do this little limp-wrist investigation, like you said, lasted 1.5 hours?
Well, we don't know. It's very clear that for whatever reason the government has intentionally tried to suppress this. Part of the reason they probably try to suppress it is because the national press won't pick up on it and won't report it like they should. And we're coming up on the 5th anniversary of it, and you've had many, many things happening in the news cycles to drown it out, even just like the murderous, rampage that took place in Dallas just within the last 24 hours. But it needs to be investigated. You're talking, again, to put this in perspective, Annie, we lost 30 Americans on board Extortion 17. That's more Americans that we lost at Fort Hood, Chattanooga, San Bernardino, all put together, and Benghazi, all put together in one swoop, involving a set of orders and inexcusable response by the chain of command not to let those 2 Apache helicopters or the AC-130 clear the landing zone out to protect these men, and it's inexcusable.
Well, we have an administration here where there's no accountability, but my question is, who were the 7 Afghanistan soldiers who boarded the plane at the last minute?
Oh, you raised another very good question, Curtis. And Thomas, if you're there, thank you for raising the issue that you raised earlier also about the landing zone being a setup. On the question of the 7 Afghans, let me back up. One of the things that shocked me, Curtis and Annie, when I began to research this, because I didn't know, and I'm ex-military, and most Americans don't know this, that since 2009, and possibly even before then, we've been flying every one of these special operations missions with Afghans on board. They put Afghans on board these choppers with our Navy SEALs, and Afghans on board these choppers with our U.S. Army Rangers. And the SEALs and the Rangers, when Obama came in, he basically stepped up special operations, and special operations began to carry the burden of the fight, and they are very good. But they put Afghans on board these choppers with SEALs and Rangers. Matter of fact, Afghans are in the command center. Afghans are aware of every plan and every mission that we fly. Even though we're in Afghanistan and conquered the nation and don't need them to allow us to do anything, we let them know what we're going to do. And the problem there is that information gets leaked because some are radical. You don't know what you're dealing with when you're dealing with these Islamic radicals. Are they going to stab you in the back or not? The Navy SEALs had told their families, and I've talked to family members of a number of the deceased Navy SEALs, that the biggest thing they worried about on these missions was not the Taliban that they were going after, because they could take care of them with no problem. our fighters are vastly superior to anything the Taliban put up. Not the Taliban, but their greatest fear is their own Afghan comrades who are flying with them from shooting in the back, because they can't trust them. They're totally untrustworthy. So we're flying these missions with Afghan forces. Now, part of the problem here is this. The mission would have normally been flown with Afghans, but minutes before the mission took off, the 7 Afghans who were supposed to be on that helicopter, Curtis, left the helicopter, and 7 other unidentified Afghans boarded the helicopter. We don't have their names. At least their names have not been published. Now, when the chopper went down, the way we discovered this is that our government was trying to notify the family members of the dead Afghans and found out the 7 Afghans who were supposed to be dead were really alive. There had been a swap out. Okay? Now, the final report of Extortion 17, signed by signed off by, and ultimately by General James Mattis, but investigated by Brigadier General Jeffrey Colt, said nothing about this swap out. This was a major breach of U.S. aviation military security procedures. The manifest must always be accurately accounted for. They let these 7 Afghans on. We don't know who they are. And the thing that's also disturbing about it, apparently the bodies of these Afghans were flown back to the United States and may have been cremated. Therefore, you lose all DNA evidence. Not a word about any of this. There was nothing about this in the final report. Nobody drilled down on, who was responsible for security on this aircraft. How did these guys get on the aircraft? Why were they swapped out? What were their names? And of course, Extortion 17 was behaving very oddly in the air. It was minutes overdue. It would not respond to many of the requests to reach it on the radio, and it was hanging in the air and almost 8 minutes overdue when it was shot out of the air. And we also know that bullets were found in some of the bodies of the Navy SEALs. So who are the Afghans and how were they placed on this aircraft? The public doesn't even know about it. The public needs to know, and answers need to be demanded.
Well, I downloaded the Colt report, which
Right.
is the executive summary, which is only 5 pages long. And I was reading it last night and remembering what you had written in your book. And everything you wrote in your book is 100% truth when you look at it and compare it to the Colt report.
Right.
To begin with, he never discusses that previously there was the insertion. Well, he does talk about the insertion of the Rangers just hours before on the 5th. He talks about them being inserted, and he talks about these Chinooks now flying into the same landing zone. He's saying it's the same landing zone. That's not true. Number one, it's 2 separate landing zones.
Right.
And the CH-47Ds that they were flying on, those Chinooks, are actually Vietnam-era transports. They are not something that you're supposed to fly into a hot zone like the special operations were going into. Where they landed the Rangers previously was not a hot zone. It was outside the area of the hot zone, outside of any range of fire, so they can land safely without fear of being attacked. But these very same pilots and very same aircraft were then used to fly into a hot zone. So the CH-47 should not have been flying into that. Instead, the Special Operations helicopter, which is an MH-47H, should have been used because it's got heavier armor, it's a swifter aircraft, plus it has Special Operations trained pilots that know how they're supposed to land these guys and get out quickly and safely. So between putting everyone on the one helicopter and then using the wrong helicopters to get in and out, those are 2 blatant things that said this is a death sentence to even begin with.
Well, you have a good command of the facts. Annie, let me just say this about the choppers that were used. It is true that the CH-47Ds used were older choppers. They were attached to a National Guard unit with guys out of Colorado and Missouri and the Kansas City area, very fine Americans. They flew the first mission to absolute perfection 3 hours earlier and did drop the Rangers off onto an area that was not hot. Then they were spun up and ordered to carry the SEALs in. Now, it's true that SEALs typically operate with Special Operations Aviation. 160th, they call them the Night Stalkers out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And they are really, really good. 150th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, or SOAR, and they typically carry the Rangers in and the SEALs in, and they do have specialized training. However, I want it to be clear that I do not blame the loss of these Americans on that brave flight crew, David Carter or Brian Nichols. David Carter, who you mentioned earlier, was one of the most experienced pilots in the Army. Extortion 17 was piloted by 2 National Guard pilots. Brian Nichols, who was the pilot in command, was the younger of the two, and this is his first combat deployment, but as a pilot. But Brian had been a ground soldier and served several deployments in both Iraq and Afghanistan before he went to flight school. David Carter, however, had 20 years experience and was sitting as co-pilot, but really was sort of Brian's mentor and really was one of the best in the Army. The problem is not so much under these circumstances the selection, in my opinion, of the Chinooks or of the aircrew. The problem goes back to lack of pre-suppression fire, because I've made this argument that if those 2 Apache helicopters and if that AC-130 had been allowed to clear that landing zone, to blast the hell out of it, to clear it out, that my grandmother could have taken those SEALs in a horse and buggy and delivered them safely. So I want to make it clear that it is true that the mission design should have been with an MH-60B, which MH-60 is the Special Forces souped-up version of the Chinook. That would have been more ideal. But even if you had flown a Special Forces chopper into an ambush and not allowed it to defend itself, it would have been disastrous. So I want to make that clear. But you do raise excellent points, and part of the issue is that the 160th SOAR, Special Operators Aviation Regiment, were so taxed that there weren't any available, apparently. So that's why the National Guard crew was used, but I don't believe the National Guard crew had any responsibility. I think they were brave Americans. The very fact that they were able to fly the previous mission in to absolute perfection shows that they are professional. This is a problem with the rules of engagement and why our military aviation assets flying along with the Chinook, that is the 2 Apaches and the AC-130, were not allowed to protect the chopper as they should have been allowed to begin with.
Hey, Don.
Well,
yes, sir.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Why did they cremate the bodies
without
the parents' permission?
Well, let me just say this: it is. I believe that some of the bodies were cremated. I don't know that all were. The military has been mum about it as to the final disposition of the bodies. Now, let me just give you a little bit on the cremation issue. On August the 9th, which was the anniversary of Nagasaki, the shootdown was the anniversary of Hiroshima. On August the 9th, the anniversary of Nagasaki, the bodies of these Americans were being flown back from Afghanistan to Dover Air Base, and they would land back in the United States on August the 9th. As the bodies were in transit and as they were about to land, the military spokesperson at the time, Colonel David Lapin, a Marine, issued the following statement. He said that due to the nature of the crash, that there are no identifiable remains. He made that comment. Keep that in mind. We also know that some of the family members, like Charles Strange, whose son Michael was killed also in this, were told that their sons had been cremated. Now remember, Lapin says, the Pentagon spokesman said no identifiable remains. Charles Strange and others says that their sons were cremated, 2011. By 2013, Congressman Chaffetz, who had not yet had his hearing, made the comment to Bob Cusack, a writer, a well-known Washington political writer writing for The Hill. The congressman, that is James Chaffetz, made this comment. He said, the body I saw did not need to be cremated. So you see, the congressman believes there's cremation going on. We have David Lapin, the colonel who's the spokesman for Pentagon, saying there were no identifiable remains, and we have family members being told that their sons' bodies are cremated. Now, once we got the evidence, however, we discovered that the claim made by Colonel Lapin there were no identifiable remains is absolutely false. In fact, we have sworn testimony, and I've examined over 1,250 pages of this Colt report, And we have sworn testimony from Army members on the ground, notably U.S. Army Pathfinders on the ground and Rangers also, who have both indicated that there were a number of bodies strewn outside the aircraft and some were barely even burnt. Sworn testimony from guys on the ground saying some were barely even burnt and clearly recognizable, that juxtaposed against Lapin's inaccurate statement that there were no identifiable remains. Okay, so it appeared that some of the bodies were cremated. We don't know that all were. We don't know because the military hasn't said. Okay? Now, this very same Congressman Chaffetz, who made the statement to Bob Cusack on the Hill that the bodies that I saw did not need to be cremated, the very same congressman, then led in February of 2014 this hour-and-a-half dog and pony show called Honoring the Heroes Extortion 17, and he had before him 5 witnesses. He and his congressional subcommittee panel had 5 witnesses. Okay? There were 2 civilians and 3 military officers. The first civilian was a Deputy Secretary of Defense named Gary Reed, who was the principal spokesperson, an Obama appointee, Deputy Secretary for a low-intensity conflict. The second was a civilian, a woman, who was the head of the Pentagon mortuary affairs. In other words, she was a mortuary affairs lady, kind of like an undertaker, someone who deals with bodies as they come in. And then the 3 officers were a Navy commander, a Air Force colonel, and an Army colonel. And all these 3 officers were the head of their respective branches' mortuary affairs. So to recap the witnesses at this February of 2014 congressional hearing, you have 1 civilian who is a Deputy Secretary of Defense, who is a political appointee, and 4 funeral experts, okay? The civilian over military of Pentagon mortuary affairs plus the 3 officers for the Marines, for the Air Force, Army, and Navy of their mortuary affairs, and not one question was asked about the status of the bodies. Not one question, were the bodies cremated? Not one follow-up. So I'm giving you the information that we know, and it's very, very odd that why in the world would we fly Afghans back to the United States for disposition and burial anyway? They're not Americans, they're Afghans. Why did we fly them back along with the 30 Americans? And we have caskets with Afghan flags. It doesn't make sense. I suspect that those bodies were cremated, and they were cremated, I suspect, to destroy DNA evidence, so that there will never be a way to determine if the aircraft was infiltrated.
Well, what's even more angrier is that, Charles Strange said that he saw pictures of his son's body, and there was no need to cremate him.
Sure.
Furthermore, Charles Strange, Michael Strange, they were Roman Catholics. It is forbidden to cremate a body in the Roman Catholic faith. So obviously these military men, they wear their dog tags. They know what's in their jacket as to their religious disposition. So they know that if it's a Roman Catholic, you do not cremate the remains. And yet Mr. Strange, Charles Strange, was told his son was cremated. And it was not just his family, but all the other military members. And then you were mentioning that the autopsies on our guys, that the person performing the autopsy, I'm sorry, my mind is going like you can't remember shit at this moment.
Right.
But when they were doing the autopsy, they were removing the rounds from the bodies and disposing of it, whereas in a normal procedure, under criminal investigation techniques, they would have been inventoried for evidence. And furthermore, you also have Brigadier General Colt, who was doing the investigation without any criminal investigation background. No NCIS was doing the investigation, but he was and his staff without the knowledge, the training, or the ability to do a criminal investigation, much less an aviation incident.
Well, you raise excellent points. I want to be absolutely clear. The autopsies were not part of the official report or the investigation. So some family members had to request autopsies. I had access to 3 autopsies. And 2 of the 3, and the 2 of the 3 who were Navy members, by the way, part of the SEAL team, bullets were found inside the bodies. And those bullets were called cook-off rounds by the military pathologist. And then they were thrown away. with a notation that they were of no evidentiary value. The investigation had not even been closed. We have examined the Armed Forces Pathology Institute of Pathology's autopsy manual, and procedure requires those bullets to be maintained and kept and not disposed of. If you look at the autopsies, the official cause of death for all the autopsies we have is homicide. This investigation was not closed, and yet bullets were pulled out of the bodies and thrown away before it was even closed. In fact, they were thrown away immediately. Now, let me just say that again, because I want to be accurate with your listening audience, Annie, the pathology report called these bullets cook-off rounds. Let me explain what that is. Now, a cook-off round. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said, which is impossible.
Of course,
the cook-off rounds would have just bounced off of them. It wouldn't have penetrated even the clothing.
Cook-off rounds would not have even ignited to the point that they would have bounced off, because it's almost impossible for a cook-off round to cause any harm. Most people think if you throw a box of ammunition in a fire, you've got a big explosion. Not true at all. And most of the time, the gunpowder doesn't even ignite. But if it ignites, if you know anything about a bullet, you know there's the bullet and then there's the casing. If that gunpowder ignites from heat, then basically the casing will travel farther than the bullet because it's lighter. And I included two major studies in my book, one from the U.S. Army to the National Firefighters Association after the end of World War II. The firefighters were concerned about their firemen going into burning houses because at the end of World War II, a lot of our guys took weapons back and bullets back. And showed scientifically it's almost impossible for those cook-off rounds to cause any harm. And yet, I think that the decision to call these cook-off rounds was a sort of a red herring that tries to deflect anyone reading it and make it think, well, that was thrown away, obviously. But even if they had been cook-off rounds, and it's impossible for them to be, those bullets should not have been thrown away immediately, and they were. A violation, again, of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology autopsy manual, and another significant element of this cover-up, in my opinion.
Yeah, now the Army officer that did this after World War II was Major General Julian Hatcher, and his 1962 report is known as Hatcher's Notebook, which is the seminal book that all fire departments and police departments use. And having been a New York City police officer, it was a good thing I learned in the police academy that these cook-off rounds could not possibly hurt us. So not to be afraid if we went into a situation.
Right.
So there was no way these rounds would have penetrated the bodies. Right. And these men that were doing the autopsies should have had the experience and knowledge to say that it was impossible to have these be cook-off rounds.
First off, you're correct. They should have. The first thing they should have done is retain the evidence. You know, it just raises a stinking red flag to throw bullets found in the body of a Navy SEAL away, called a cook-off round. But you're right; they should have been. And I appreciate you for your service in the NYPD. But it's very rare, to be honest with you, Annie. Most people think that they thought they'd get away with it by calling a cook-off round. I think that's just what I think. It's inexcusable.
No, that it is. And we can go back again to that time that the Extortion 17 was hanging in the air over the landing zone. And it wasn't just for a few minutes. Now, if we go by the Colt report, which Wikipedia actually mimics, there was a time that it was between 2:22 a.m. and 2:38 a.m. That's a total of 16 minutes of them hovering over a landing zone, an open target. So what was going on in that helicopter for those 16 minutes? And then we throw into the fact that the black box is missing.
Yes. The chronology of the flight should have been a 10-minute flight. Takeoff, wheels up 2:22, wheels down should have been at 2:32. The chopper was actually shot down at 2:39. So it had been hovering for almost 7 minutes in the vicinity of the landing zone, not responding. And the problem is, you think about this, you've got this loud Chinook, and when it was shot down 100 to 150 feet over the deck, or as we call it in the Navy, the ground, the deck, at point-blank range, it's a loud thing. And so the louder it is and longer it hangs, the easier it is for Taliban forces to target it. Because, it should have swooped in, dropped its guys, and swooped out. But it was hanging in the air, making itself a target, just hanging for almost 7 minutes. What was going on inside that chopper? And of course, the black box. That's another issue, which really was foolishly dealt with at the Chapitz hearing. The black box, within minutes, within an hour and a half of Extortion 17 going down, we had a U.S. Army Pathfinder team on the ground to join the Rangers, and the Pathfinder's first orders were to find the black box. I know this because of the sworn testimony of the Pathfinders. They spent nearly 3 days looking for the black box, and the Pathfinder platoon leader testified it was the first time we'd never been able to find a black box. That story continued until in October, after this chopper went down in August. Some of the family members were brought in to Little Creek, Virginia, for a briefing by Brigadier General Colt, who had been the principal investigator. And some of the family members said, General, they had enough, savvy to ask about the black box. General, why had the black box? And they were told at that time, in October of 2011, that the black box, get this, guys, washed away in a flood. They were told the black box washed away in a flood. Can you believe that? There was a small wadi the Tangi River. If you look at the official photographs from this, the Tangi River is basically, it looks like a muddy creek. But there have been some flash floods, and of course the creek can flood. Any creek can flood during a flash flood. But the notion when we pulled black boxes out of thousands of feet of water that we would lose a black box which has a low-frequency pinger on it anyway to a flood is crazy. The military stuck with this, it washed away in a flood story, never changed it at all until February 27, 2014, when before Congressman Chafitz's committee, this Gary Reed was asked about a black box, and he said, well, these choppers never had a black box to begin with. They were just too old to have a black box. That's what Reed said. After letting this it washed away in the flood story last from 2011 until 2014, the first time we heard it, never had it to begin with. Not one member of the Congress challenged Mr. Reed. Not one said, well, Mr. Reed, if there was no black box, why did we send an Army Pathfinder team to look for it for 3 days? Mr. Reed, if there was no black box, why did the Pathfinder commander say this is the first time we've never been able to find one? And by the way, if you do, all you have to do, I have been advised by some senior retired military helicopter pilots on this issue, and the notion that this chopper did not have a black box because it was analog rather than digital is bunk anyway. The analog choppers do have black boxes. But nobody challenged Gary Reed on this point. Nobody said, why do we tell them it washed away in a flood, Mr. Reed? Nobody said, why do we wait for almost 3 years before you change your story again, Mr. Reed? Just let them skate like you're giving them a piece of ice cream and letting them walk to the jewelry store or whatever. It was ridiculous.
Well, what's funny is you and I spoke privately on the phone, and my brother is one of the ones that, with Parker Hennepin, helps, do the testing on the black boxes, and he designed the lab for them and everything. He does a lot of work with the black boxes.
Right.
And, even though a helicopter can be an analog, the black boxes has all different ways of recording the data and the statistics and what the dials are reading. It does have the ability to do that even if it's an analog. They
exactly.
also have them where they are combined, where you could have digital and analog combined. But a black box is not black. It happens to be yellow.
You're exactly
yellow.
right. But
and
again, right.
Oh, I was going to say, when the Pathfinders first got to the wreckage scene, there was no indication that they had failed to see that there was a black box. It's after the rain hit that we went back that they couldn't find it. So there's a discrepancy as to whether or not they actually had an eyeball on it or saw the area of the plane, or the helicopter, that it was in that should have been still intact. But when they went back 3 days, they could not. Why so much manpower for something that never existed?
Someone should be questioned why, if there's no black box, you send the Pathfinder team to look for one. Your point about the analog choppers having black boxes after having talked to your brother is correct. But, of course, not a single member of the Congress or their staffs had done enough homework to challenge Mr. Reed, and don't know if they would have challenged Mr. Reed had they done their homework. But this is an odd thing, because when you look at the chronology of the shoot down, the official report indicates that U.S. Army Rangers were the first on the ground at approximately 4:14 a.m. The Rangers actually marched in. They were the same Rangers who these choppers had put down 3 hours earlier. That is what the report would have you believe, that it was approximately 4:14 a.m. when the Rangers arrived. However, when I began to study the chronology, we saw that by 3:11 a.m., just less than an hour after the shootdown, there had been at least 2 other ground units coming in onto the scene, and we don't know who they are. One was a group we think called Lima Bravo. Another indicated that coalition forces entered the crash scene and then surveyed the aircraft and then left on an unidentified road. So, of course, the final report does not mention that at all. But we do know that 2 other units were on the ground, and that was left out of the final report. And I would like to know who those units are and whether any of them tamper with the black box. That's what I'd like to know.
Oh, and there's so much more that you can ask and have answered. A Colt report also put the person that shot the RPG at the helicopter in a building more than 220 yards away. Or yards, or was it meters? Am I getting my measurements
It's meters,
wrong?
actually. So meters,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
But
right.
In your book, just using simple geometry, you proved that is absolutely impossible. First off, the tree line would have made the helicopter without having a visual sight. So in other words, it would have been a crapshoot, just trying to hit a helicopter from that far of a distance. The RPG would not have made it, number one, that distance, and the shooter would not have been able to see the helicopter. But by using the mathematics of the trajectory of the RPG, where it was seen, where the helicopter was hit, and how far the helicopter was from the ground down, you proved that the shooter was actually in the tree lines right at the edge of the landing zone.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do that. First off, based upon the military's own, when you go into the crash investigation report and they give you a report on the RPG in question, its range is only about 170 meters. So it's shooting 220 meters is 50 yards beyond its effective range, number one. Number two, it was absolutely dark. Number three, when you look at the angle of strike on the blade, as you were pointing out, the angle of strike on the blade, and you consider that we're only 150 feet off the deck, it certainly would have been absolutely impossible for that shot to have come from 220 meters away. The reason, in my opinion, they made the claim that it came from 220 meters away is because that would have been outside the landing zone. They want to make the argument that it would have done no good to clear the landing zone, but it's absolutely impossible. This is a point-blank shot. Going back to an earlier point that I made when we got a call in from Thomas, remember the British and French press reported the Taliban had been tipped on the precise position of the landing zone, and the mathematics show that this was a point-blank shot just by the angle of strike against the blade. It was almost at a 45-degree angle, not at a very, very broad angle, which would have been the case if it had been shot from 220 meters. Matter of fact, it would almost have to hit the end of the blade, if you follow me on that. So there's no question it's a point-blank shot, and that's a bunch of bunk when they claim it was shot from 220 meters.
Which also goes to beg to differ that, the Taliban did set up this ambush specifically. And again, Colt and Mateus completely ignored reports that the Afghan military had been infiltrated as much as 50% by the Taliban just prior to this incident. So how
that
can
was
you...
ignored and kept... I'm sorry, go ahead. Let me cut you off.
No, how can you turn around and have these Afghans going out with our men on these missions, taking part in the planning? And a matter of fact, the Afghans had so much details of the planning, they had the ability to veto whether or not a mission would go forward or not.
It is beyond comprehension that we would have Afghans, Islamic Afghans, on board these missions with these special operators. Absolutely beyond belief, unless you're only a fool would think that's a good idea. But yet that's what the executive branch of our national government has deemed to be appropriate. And it's crazy, and it's getting our guys killed.
Hey,
Yeah,
Don.
Yes, sir.
Do you think it's possible these Afghan Afghanis that got on the helicopter could have started shooting some of our guys while they were in there?
Yes, I do think that's possible. The circumstantial evidence points to that. I don't have a smoking gun, but what I do have is I've got bullets in several of the bodies. I have the bullets thrown away. I have an inexplicable delay. I have the chopper is seemingly unable to find its landing zone, which makes no sense at all. Remember, we've got a 20-year veteran pilot, David Carter, who's in that cockpit. No way he could not have found this landing zone. No way. You can take GPS and find your garage. You know, drive straight to your garage with your eyes closed, and that's civilian GPS. So I think something could have happened on the chopper. I think there needs to be an investigation as to why those bullets were thrown away. And there needs to be some answers as to whether what happened to the Afghan bodies and who were they and how did they get on board. I do think it's possible. I'm not saying it definitely happened, but it would not surprise me in the least bit based on what I've seen.
Well, I want to remind everyone you're here listening to Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, the Fix FM. Our guest is Don Brown, and the book that he has written is called Call Sign Extortion 17, The Shootdown of SEAL Team 6. Now, Don, I want to let you know that in the show description, I do have a link to that Daily Mail article that came out immediately after the shooting.
Great.
It says that the Afghans say it was a setup. I have a link also to the Indiegogo link so people can find out about the movie project, as well as to your website, fallenangelmovie.org. I'm sorry, fallenangelthemovie.org, as well as your Facebook page for Extortion 17. So those listening in to the podcast later on, just scroll to the bottom of the description and click on the link so they can find out how to get your book and what's going on with the movie, so we can get more people involved and calling on Congress for a full investigation. So many things are wrong with this flight. It just boggles the mind that, I can understand one or two things going wrong, but every single step of the way, it was actually, these men were actually sacrificial lambs at the altar of our government, I think. I honestly believe it was an appeasement to the Taliban because we took out their holy leader, bin Laden.
When you look at the time frame of those 90 days between the bin Laden mission and this mission, you know that the Taliban immediately vowed retaliation. The former Defense Secretary, Bob Gates, had basically didn't want any information to come out at all about the identity of this unit. 2 days later, however, Joe Biden identifies and outs the SEALs in a speech at the Washington Hotel honoring the 50th anniversary of the North Atlantic Alliance. Leon Panetta himself gave the identity of SEAL Team 6 to producers of the movie Zero Dark 30. And so there were major breaches, even among the highest levels of the Obama administration, identifying these guys. Should have never been identified. Not only that, but we had intercepted, and this again is the investigation, we intercepted message traffic from the Taliban indicating that they were moving an additional 100 Taliban fighters into this very relatively small Tangi River Valley solely for the purpose of shooting down a United States Special Operations chopper in retaliation for the bin Laden mission. We knew all this. There had been 3 shots taken against American choppers in this small valley between the bin Laden mission and the Extortion 17 disaster, and yet knowing all of that, knowing that they were revved up with extra fighters in there, had vowed to shoot us down, knowing all that, our chain of command still denied the AC-130 permission to take out Taliban in the landing zone, and these guys were killed because of it. It is absolutely inexcusable. Someone should be burned at the stake, if you ask me, because of it.
Yeah, well, you went over the dialogue that was going on between the various aircraft that was while Extortion 17 was still in the air. And it was really strange because you questioned whether or not the pilots in Extortion 17 were trying to send some sort of a message saying that there's something wrong. First off, they asked for a sparkle, and it was not within the time frame that any lighting on the ground should have been done. And then there was a bunch of other things where there was a burn, where the burn should have been only 2 seconds and it lasted more than a minute or close to a minute. There's a lot that went on and things that were being said. Unfortunately, there is no cockpit flight recorder, voice recorder, that's missing, along with the black box. But you do have the recordings from the other aircraft, from their live mics. And what went on? It was really, really strange. We've got Thomas that wants to comment. I'll bring him on in a minute, but I want you to comment about what was going on over here.
Well, you're right. I raised the question, were the pilots trying to tell us something? Because what was supposed to happen is that AC-130 flying overhead, its job was twofold. It was to circle the landing zone, and one, to make sure the landing zone was clear of Taliban. And it had the firepower to do it. So did the Apaches, as Thomas mentioned earlier. The second thing it's supposed to do, at the 1 minute mark before landing, at 1 minute, it fires down an infrared beam. And that infrared beam is called a burn. And it cannot be seen with the naked eye. It can only be seen with night vision goggles. But it is to basically light the landing zone for the choppers. So that burn is visible for 1 minute. And at 1 minute, they were supposed to ask for a burn. Well, and that burn so the idea, it lasts a minute at the maximum. Hopefully you can get them down, and get them out and turn the burn off after the guys are out. So, but what happened instead is that there were some sporadic conversations with Extortion 17. At one point, the pilot, we don't know if it was David Carter or if it was Brian Nichols, but it said it identified as PC, Extortion 17, which is pilot in command, so presumably that's Nichols, was saying, we're having trouble finding landings and we're having trouble lining up. And then he comes back and says, can you guys give us a sparkle, please? And when he says, can you guys give us a sparkle, please, now let me explain the difference between a sparkle and that burn that I just described. Remember I said at 1 minute that AC-130 is to fire a burn. It's a big flashlight, an invisible infrared flashlight at 1 minute before landing zone. Well, when he said, when Nichols said, can you give us a sparkle, please? A sparkle is a burst of light. It isn't a continuous light like a burn. It's kind of like, if you remember the old snap, crackle, pop commercials, real quick, like a flash bulb used to be, or a strobe light. Boom, it's on and off. When he asked for that sparkle, when the Extortion 17 said, can you guys give us a sparkle, please? The Apache pilot beside him said, Roger, are you 1 minute? And in other words, the request for the burn was supposed to come at 1 minute. Then Nichols, we believe, says, no, negative, but we're having trouble seeing. We're just trying to line up where we are, line up the landing zone, which I can't believe they had trouble finding the landing zone. Okay, I don't believe it at all. Then when that comment was made, the Apache pilot comes back on the air traffic control transcript that says, not even a minute out, and you're requesting a damn sparkle. Those were the exact words. Not even a minute out, and you're requesting a damn sparkle. The Apache pilot was confused and knew something was wrong. It's a dumb thing to request any type of light or sparkle more than a minute out, because anybody on the ground could see if they had night vision goggles. But the sparkle was not part of the game plan. And I wonder if maybe Brian Nichols or David Carter were trying to tell us something requesting a sparkle, because it was not part of the game plan. They'd gone over the flight plan. They executed to perfection 3 hours earlier. The sparkle only could have made themselves a target. And they weren't even a minute out yet. So there were strange things going on in the chopper, and that's why when you asked me, Curtis, earlier if I thought there could have been infiltration, it would not surprise me at all. Something strange was going on in that chopper, and something wasn't right. I don't know exactly what, but something wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was something else hang on a second, Curtis. There was something else that he also said. They were assuming it was the pilot, but it possibly someone else pretending to be the pilot, saying something to the effect that they have some confusion. Who's the they were talking about? Something to that effect.
Yeah, well, that's correct. I mean, there was an odd reference to they don't know where the landings are. And so who is they? I mean, we don't know what that means. It just, again, these are the few communications that we got from Extortion 17 were strange. They were strange in the final minutes of its life, and I obviously something was going wrong inside that aircraft. That much I'm convinced of. And then when you consider the delay in landing, the fact they couldn't find the landing, bullets found in the bodies, the obvious request for a sparkle, it adds up to something very, very strange.
Yeah. Now the way that the helicopters are set up is that the special op guys that were getting ready to land and disembark, they have no visual of the pilots because there's the door, there's the wall, so they have no idea of what's going on around them or outside. So it would not be coming from them. So the two pilots are up there. The question is now, was there a third person in the cabin with them, demanding these things to be done?
That's a good question. I mean, that's something that needs to be answered. And if we had the flight data recorder or the cockpit voice recorder, we would know. But if there was one, it must have washed away with the flood, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. What else
and I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. All right, Curtis, go ahead, and then I'm going to bring Thomas on.
Yeah, this has all the hallmarks of a setup. But my question is this: was the mission, because they were on a mission, was the mission to extract some Rangers who had gotten, bogged down in a firefight?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me back up a little bit. One of the arguments the AC-130 had with ground control is, why are you flying this mission to begin with? The Rangers had gone out that night to look for a Taliban operative named Qari Tahir. The Rangers and the SEALs take turns in their different roles sometimes. The Rangers were part of what's called the Initial Assault Force, or AF, Alpha Foxtrot. They were the assault force. The SEALs that night were in the role of what we call an IRF, or Immediate Reactionary Force. Now, it's important to keep in mind, Curtis, that the IRF's role is to act only in the event of emergency. Had the Rangers been pinned down, then it would be appropriate to send the SEALs out to save them. But to send an immediate reactionary force out hunting for a single Taliban member when the Rangers already had it under control is inexplicable. So there have been some inconsistent reports on why they were flown to begin with. But we know, not only from what we have on the record, but also from information we have gotten since my book has come out, from some members of the AC-130 crew, that the AC-130 was in almost a constant argument with flight control. Why are you flying this mission? There's no reason for an emergency. Why are you sending them in? Please turn them around. But for whatever reason, the powers that be were hell-bent on flying this team out into this Taliban zone, even though their role did not meet the mission that night. So that's one question. Another of many questions that needs to be answered, Curtis.
And also, why did they send out the Rangers to begin with? Everything could have been done with a drone. And
interestingly, that question, a question was asked of General Colt in August of 2011 by some of the family members. Why didn't you just take him out with a drone? And the very weak answer was, well, we wanted to win the hearts and minds of the Afghani people. That answer doesn't even fit. It's pretty dumb, but that was the answer that was given. The supreme irony here is that several weeks later, this Taliban operative, Qari Tahir, who the Rangers were going after, was actually killed by a missile strike from an F-16. So, he was killed by an airstrike anyway later, although for some reason they were wasting special forces on this particular mission for reasons unknown. But he should have and could have been taken out easily with a drone strike, very, very easily.
All right, well, Thomas, go ahead with your comment or question with Don Brown, our guest.
Hey, Annie. This is Thomas again. You know what? Curtis hit the nail on the head because he brought up exactly what I was thinking. The reason why they cremated the bodies, they didn't cremate, in my opinion, they didn't cremate the American bodies. As Don said, they cremated the Islamic Muslim bodies because the 7 Afghanis that switched places, in my opinion, they were the jihadis, they were the Taliban. The other ones that got off the plane, those were the original. I mean, this stinks to high heaven what they did, and what's really sick and twisted. I believe it came down from the highest levels of our government, otherwise known as
Valerie Jarrett. That's my viewpoint.
Don?
I think that I think he probably is right that the Afghan bodies were cremated. Based on what we know, I don't have absolute proof of that. I don't believe that all American bodies were, because we know some of the family members were told by morticians that they saw their sons' bodies. So I don't believe all the Americans were cremated. But again, the military won't say. And Chaffetz had a perfect chance to ask that question during the Dog and Pony Show hearing of February 2014. He did not do it, and it's very, very odd that he did not do it. It does stink to the highest heaven, and it's true. The only way to destroy DNA evidence is through cremation. And it's also inconceivable that bodies would not have been identifiable anyway, because even if the bodies were burned, you could identify them with dental records. So it just isn't adding up. And I think honestly that Thomas may be onto something.
Hey, Don.
Yes,
I
sir.
just want to say for the sake of our audience that Special Forces guys like Delta Force and Navy SEALs and Army Rangers and Green Berets, these guys are the elite of the elite. And
right.
If you were to put a monetary value to it, you do that with a life. It costs this country about anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000 to train a person.
Right.
So
at least
you just don't put that kind of that kind of person, that level, of commando into just any kind of fight where he's going to lose.
Right. Well, and clearly these guys would not have lost if they'd gotten onto the ground. I don't think there's any question about that. But and you certainly don't basically tie their hands behind their back before they can even get into the fight,
right.
Which is what happened with these rules of engagement.
And my point is that because how much it costs to train these guys and their specialties involved, you weigh what missions you send these guys on. So that's why this thing is so fishy.
You raise a very, 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 very valid
You
point.
protect those assets.
Absolutely.
Well, when you think about all the steps that led to the final shootdown of Extortion 17 and then the subsequent reports, you've got Rangers and SEALs being sent on a mission that they should never have been sent on. You had Rangers inserted, and then the story was that they were being attacked when that was false. Then you send these two antiquated Chinooks to transport special ops, and instead of separating them as usual procedure is between the two helicopters, they cram everyone onto one. They were basically sitting ducks. And then with the helicopter being hanging over the landing zone, the RPG that conveniently happened to be in the right place at the right time, the request for the sparkle and the burn, and you think about one thing after another, that it's impossible to say that this was an accident, and it's impossible to say that the Colt report is true and accurate. And it is so frustrating when we see these men and women that have volunteered to protect our rights and liberties, that their lives are just so expendable.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking. But I think the worst part of the whole situation is that when our Americans and the Afghan bodies were flown to the base in Germany, the final prayer over their bodies, you've got to tell us about that. I did not bookmark that page. I'm looking for it. I'm looking for the prayer that was said, and I can't find it at the moment.
It was the bodies were bought before they were flown back to the United States into Bagram Air Base. They were pulled out. The caskets were taken out, and for what we call a ramp ceremony. And at the ramp ceremony, there was an American chaplain who spoke over the body, spoke a few verses from the New Testament. Then they turned it over to a local Islamic imam who spoke Arabic, apparently, and no one really knew what he was saying. And nothing else was said about it until January of 2013, when Admiral Billy McRaven and a senior enlisted advisor, a Delta Forces Master Sergeant, drove out to the home of Billy and Karen Vaughn in Stuart, Florida. Billy and Karen were making some noise, and I think Admiral McRaven wanted to encourage him not to make noise. And the Master Sergeant was there, the Sergeant Major was there with Admiral McRaven, 4-star Admiral, who now was commander of Special Operations Forces. And he was a JSOC commander at this point. And Billy had discovered a couple of things on his own in the transcript. One of the things he discovered was this issue of the 7 Afghans. Now remember that the 7 Afghans were not reported anywhere on the final report. You know that because you've already read the report, Annie. Nothing was mentioned about it. And so Billy asked a question to the Admiral. He said, I noticed there were 7 Afghans that got on board the helicopter that weren't originally supposed to be there, but he said, but nothing else was said about it, so I guess it must not have been a big deal. That's what Billy said to the Admiral. The Admiral stood there and just stared at him for a few moments, and when it became obvious the Admiral was not going to say anything, the Sergeant Major spoke up, took the heat, and said, actually, Mr. Vaughn, that was a very big deal. Should never have happened. The senior enlisted Delta Force NCO speaks up and puts his neck on the line to alert the Vaughns that something has gone wrong, with the flight manifest. The 7 Afghans should have never been there. And after that, this Sergeant Major, who's a hero in my opinion, he's a hero anyway, but he stuck his neck out right with a 4-star Admiral. He said, and by the way, Mr. Vaughn, he said, your son's teammates were not very happy about what happened at the ramp ceremony. Now, we're talking, this is in January of 2013. The ramp ceremony was August the 7th of 2011. So we're 2.5, almost 3 years away. And Billy said, what do you mean, the ramp ceremony? He said, and the Sergeant Major said, you didn't know about it? Billy said, no. The Sergeant Major said, tell you what, I'll send you a tape, a recording. So a few weeks later, this CD comes in the mail, and Billy and Karen open it, they put it in the computer, and they can see the ceremony taking place there at Bagram. And they can hear the American chaplain's words. Then they hear this imam. They don't know what it means. So Billy and Karen sent it off to several different sources, including Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann's office, to Tom Trento, who we work with at United West, and they had this recording independently translated. And the translations came back consistent every time. The imam in Arabic was basically cursing the Americans to hell for having challenged Allah. The enemy of Allah's will be consumed by the fiery mountain. And this was those last words that were spoken over our American heroes in Afghanistan before they flown back to the United States in Arabic. And we would not know about it to this day had the brave Sergeant Major not stuck his neck out and alerted the Vaughns about it, and they had it translated. It's absolutely just a travesty.
It is. Now, here you've got brave American heroes, and we allow an imam to desecrate their bodies and their memories by condemning them to hell, calling them the infidels, and praising the Afghan soldiers as martyrs. So again, it begs to differ. Were these actually Taliban members that were on the aircraft on Extortion 17?
I believe they probably were. I mean, it makes no sense at all as why there was a swap out. By the way, to put this in context, you recall that President Obama had given a drop-dead date in which we were going to leave Afghanistan. As that date began to approach, and I cover this in the book also, the president of Afghanistan, Karzai, began negotiating with the Taliban. In other words, our ally on the ground, Karzai, who we installed, was negotiating with the Taliban. He wanted to befriend the Taliban. He wanted to bring them into his government because he felt he could not survive after we left without the Taliban. The Taliban was complaining about our special forces, and Karzai was complaining about them also and wanted them out. So we are getting to an adversarial relationship from the puppet government that we put there, Hamid Karzai, who now was cozying up with the Taliban and was cozy with the Taliban at the time of the shootdown. And by the way, do you know how we first found out about the shootdown, guys? Annie, Curtis, you know who announced it?
The Afghan government.
It was not our own government. It was Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, who announced the shootdown of these special forces. I do believe that the Taliban was tipped. And it all sort of adds up.
Hey, Don.
Yes, sir.
It almost sounds like to me that their motive was to kill a lot of Americans, in response to Osama bin Laden being killed. But I believe also, like in Black Hawk Down, they learned a lesson from that. If we kill a lot of Americans, they'll leave.
Right.
And maybe they figure if they kill a lot of our special forces, they'll take our special forces out of there.
Right. Right, exactly.
I don't know.
Well, Karzai had been pushing to have our special forces removed. And why is that? Because, frankly, they were so effective in killing Taliban. And he needed the Taliban to survive. It makes sense when you look at it all in the context. He basically had turned on us, and that's something you won't hear much at all, although it's documented, and in my book I document articles from the New York Times and other organizations. The New York Times may have a leftist editorial board, but they do a decent job of covering the facts of the war, and reported on Karzai's complaints and his rumblings and his negotiating with the Taliban. It was out there, but Americans are too busy with their heads stuck in the sand and watching the Kardashians to pay attention to any of this.
It is, and everyone says Karzai is our ally, which is the exact opposite. He is no ally of the United States. And I think, as you write in your book, that his hatred of us was cemented when a family member was killed in an airstrike. He has been negotiating, or actually now the current Afghan government is still negotiating with the Taliban. And President Obama was just on TV, yesterday or the day before, talking about, bringing down the troops. He's extending the time limit, bringing it up to 8,400 instead of 5,500. And again, Obama was encouraging negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban.
Right.
Hello, the Taliban is the enemy. We went into Afghanistan because of the Taliban. You're not going to make friends with them. Get over it.
Oh, I happen to agree with that. And I do think the circumstances under which this mission were flown were just ripe for suicide, and this was a suicide mission the way these SEALs were ordered to participate in it. It was absolutely a suicide mission, and our government has blood on its hands because of it.
Hey Don, how does
yes, sir.
the Special Forces community take this?
It's interesting that you asked that question because some of them are mum about it. Some, are saying nothing. Most of the Special Forces I've talked to who are off of active duty and are retired are absolutely livid about it. But you got to remember, the ones on active duty can only say so much because they've got issues. You cannot criticize the chain of command. So you're not getting a lot from inside current Special Forces. But I've talked on this a number of times around the country, and I've had former SEALs come up to me and just live it even about every aspect of this. Even why are you sending a 17-member SEAL team out for one Taliban punk? You don't need to do that. That's just a horrible allocation of resources to begin with. Pretty angry.
Yeah, they operate in groups of 6.
Right.
Well, what's even strange is that Charles Strange reported that his son Michael felt he was being targeted. Right after the takedown of bin Laden, all the members of SEAL Team 6, felt like they had targets on their back. And so
that's
before
he
went back to Afghanistan, he did his last will and testament.
Right. That's because Biden had outed the SEALs as the Special Forces unit that took out bin Laden. And they did feel like they had targets. So it wasn't just Michael Strange that felt that way. It was many of them who flew on this mission. Aaron Bond felt that way. They wanted their parents to get off social media. They felt like, if you do, I'll give President Obama this much credit. When he came out to announce the shootdown of the killing of bin Laden, he said that the operation was carried out by a small group of Americans. Now, the agreement was you don't reveal who the group was. Now, of course, if he had revealed the group, it would have taken attention off him and put it on the group. That's sort of a cynical view. But all that aside, he did not reveal the name of the group. It was 2 days later that Joe Biden revealed that the Navy SEALs had carried this mission out in the speech that he gave. And that's when the cat got out of the bag. It was right after that that the SEAL community became extremely concerned, not only feeling like they had targets on their backs, but they were worried about their family members here in the United States also.
And Biden had just participated in a briefing where each and every member said, I will not mention SEAL Team 6. And then he goes right out 5 minutes later and blows the safety of every one of those brave men in those special operation units.
Absolutely true.
That's not an accident.
I agree.
Unless he's got a major form of dementia that you can't remember something from 5 minutes ago, it's not a mistake. And every step of this way speaks of a deliberate assassination of our men by not just the Taliban and the Afghan government, by our own government. I'm going to say it again. I honestly believe they were sacrificed just to appease the Taliban.
My gut tells me the same thing.
Well, I am so glad that I had you here on the show today, and I encourage everyone to pick up your book, Call Sign Extortion 17, The Shootdown of SEAL Team 6. You can also get it by going on to Amazon, download the Kindle version, or go get the hardcover, especially since I love what you wrote in my hardcover one, Best Wishes to Me for standing with me on Extortion 17, Keep the Faith and God Bless. Were you sitting next to me when I got back to my little radio table in Myrtle Beach when I had just gotten that Patriot Award?
I was indeed, and it was very well deserved, and I congratulate you for that.
Oh, well, they got me good because I had no idea that it was going, and I had actually gone down to see if Wild Bill was down in the main area because he was supposed to be my next interview. And I'm just standing there in the back looking for him, and all of a sudden I hear my name, and people are pushing me towards the front podium. And they got me good. I swear, they got me real good on that one.
You earned it, and I'm glad they got you good. And I'm glad that you deserve honor that's bestowed upon you, Annie. And I'm just grateful to be with both you and Curtis today.
Well, it is our pleasure. Now, you are going to tell me what's going on with the movie. You haven't got a company yet, but you are in negotiations, right?
I can say that we are in very serious negotiations. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to say much more than that because the other members of the production team would string me up. But anyway, just keep that in your prayers because this is a story that does need to be told, and we remain optimistic that the truth is going to come out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Now, are you going to do this as a documentary type of one, or are you going to follow the same format that they used in 13 Hours?
The answer to the question is that both of those options are on the table at the moment.
It's going to be. I can't wait to see it come out. And do you have a time frame yet? When you feel like you're going to start to go into production?
Well, again, I have to defer back to what my answer earlier. The other members of the production team have said, zip it until we're ready to do a formal statement. So I just ask that you and your listeners keep us in prayer on this. There's some good things can come out of it, but we still have a couple of shells to move around, and so thank you. I do appreciate it. I really do.
I tried my best. I tried to pull the teeth. It just didn't work.
Well, that's good. You're good. You're a good journalist. What can you say?
Don't call me a journalist. I have integrity.
My apologies. Don't call me a lawyer. I'm an naval officer, so there we go.
Now, tell us about your service, because I do see that you were a JAG officer. And tell us about it.
Yes, I spent 5 years active duty as a JAG officer. A lot of that time I spent as a prosecutor. Then they sent me to the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Diego, and we handled a lot of civil actions filed against the U.S. that were Navy-related. The biggest case I handled involved an F-14 that went down. And interestingly, I was involved in an F-14. We had an F-14 crash at Brown Field in San Diego, and we lost one of the two pilots. The student was lost. The instructor survived, but a lawsuit came out of that, and I wound up handling that in federal court for the Navy. And so the way things work out is that people sometimes ask, how did you get involved in the Extortion 17 project? Well, our mutual friend Tom Trento was covering a news conference at a National Press Club in D.C. in 2011 and May of 2013, involving 3 or 4 of the family members, and there were some pretty prominent military and ex-military and members of Congress involved. Alan West was there supporting them, Congressman Louis Gohmert, Admiral Ace Lyons, who was SINCPAC under President Reagan, General Jerry Boykin, who's widely known, was lending his support. And I watched that press conference, and it was just gripping. It was very obvious something had gone wrong, but the family members didn't know how to read military ease. And so someone said, you got to get involved with this, because I was an ex-naval officer, so I knew how to read military investigations. But I also done that major aviation disaster involving the F-14. So I had some experience with aviation disasters, and sent an email to one of the family members and got involved from there. But I was involved with that in San Diego, and then after that, they sent me to the Pentagon. My last duty station, I was handling, doing military legal memoranda for the Secretary of the Navy on a number of officer issues. So it was, and then I did 11 years in reserve, mostly inactive. So it was a total of 16 altogether. So, and left as lieutenant commander, and now I'm here with you.
And doing a bang-up job. And I want people to go to your website, fallenangelthemovie.org, and check it out and get your book. Also, check out the Facebook page.
Exactly.
If I can get my teeth in straight. Extortion 17, Demand a Congressional Hearing. And the purpose of the book and the purpose of the upcoming movie is to demand a full investigation by the House Judiciary Committee or whoever else is supposed to be doing these investigations in Congress, and get a full investigation out, get all this information out to we the people, because these are our sons and our daughters that we are putting in harm's way. And if our government is not going to be responsible and allow something as horrific as Extortion 17 to happen, or the attack in the Benghazi to happen, and there are no repercussions for this, no, we deserve better for those that we ask to defend us.
Absolutely.
And it's so important that we do shows like this to expose the truth and to encourage everyone to read and to learn more and ask the questions that need to be asked. I mean, I texted you when Jason Chaffetz was asking those idiotic questions yesterday about Director Comey, and I can understand. I can see why he bungled the investigation back in 2014, because he asked Comey, did Hillary lie? That was the question. Did Hillary? No. Be specific and ask a question that would force an answer out of him. He never asked the right questions in Extortion 17, and he did not ask the right questions yesterday.
That's it. We deserve better.
That we do. And do you have any other works coming up besides working on the movie?
Well, I have another. I was going to say, if anybody wants to check out some of my other books, you can go to my website, which is at donbrownbooks.com. That's donbrownbooks.com. And also, you can contact me there. So you can send an email, and my publicist will get it, and I'll be happy to respond if anyone has any questions. I'm scheduled to have another release out next year called The Last Fighter Pilot, the story of the final combat mission of World War II. It's about the final P-51 mission flown over Japan, which took place on August 14th, 5 days after the bombing of Nagasaki. And so that's due out with Regnery Publishers next year, and I'm looking forward to that as well. Thanks for asking. I appreciate it.
I mean, I should probably put you in touch with a friend of mine. I don't know if you know of Colin Heaton. He's with Lewis Heaton Books, and he is a rather prolific military writer. Former Marine and Army Special Ops. He was a sniper and a college professor for history and military history, and he's got a slew of books out, and he does a lot of stuff on World War II and others. He actually has years and years of recordings of military men on both sides of the battle.
Right.
And I got to have you check him out and hook the two of you up, because I'm sure the two of you can work on something together.
That would be fabulous. I appreciate that very much.
Well, we're down to our last 5 minutes, Curtis, and we're going to be back next week with two great guests. One of them is Matt Fitzgibbons, and, who's the other one? Andrew Langer will be with us on Tuesday. I may be late to the show, or hopefully I will be on time to the show. Unfortunately, my husband's going for another surgical procedure on Tuesday, so we'll see what happens and whether or not I can make it live with you, Curtis. But we've got a great guest lined up. And, Don, again, thank you so very much. You've got my cell phone, so keep in touch with me.
You got it. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Curtis. And you have a blessed weekend, and thanks for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for the hard work, and thank you for your service. All right, ladies and gentlemen, check him out. Check out donbrownbooks.com. Also check out fallenangelthemovie.org. just check it all out and get a hold of his book and spread the message. And please, if anyone is interested in having Don on his show, let me know, and we can get ourselves in contact with him and get him onto your shows. Thank you for listening, Curtis. This has been a great, great show. But the party's over, and it's time to say goodbye. So until then, I wish everyone a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. And please keep in mind in your hearts the 5 Dallas police officers that were murdered just this morning, as well as now, I believe, 1 in Minnesota. Until then,
if you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. Health care plan. Health care plan.
Breaking your back, we're gonna redistribute when we make our big tax. Hey, sit back down, don't be a jerk, cause none deserve it better than the ones who won't work. We're gonna throw away what our forefathers wrote. Use your hard-earned money just to buy a new boat. Welcome to the place. Welcome to the place of the left hypocrisy. Little peace houses for you and me. And telephone to Bob, that's all you lost. Political correctness will replace the Bill of Rights. Support religious freedom, bless you, pray to Jesus Christ. The presence in our pockets, cause there's no other free. You cannot make a move, now that the NSA can see. Don't expect equality, respect for fair play. The IRS will target those who vote the wrong way. Welcome to the place. Welcome to the place of the left hypocrisy.
This is the most transparent administration in history. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
If you got a business, you didn't build that.